Hello and welcome back. If you're new here, welcome. I'm so glad you found this space. And if you're returning, it's good to have you here again. Tonight, we're going to do something a little different. We're going to travel back in time. Way back, about 2,000 years, give or take. And we're going to explore a life that you've probably seen depicted in paintings, in stained glass windows, maybe in illustrated Bible storybooks when you were a child. You know the images I'm talking about. Peaceful boats on calm blue water, fishermen with gentle smiles casting nets in the golden light of sunset, Jesus calling to them from the shore, and they simply step out of their boats and follow him. It all looks so serene, so simple, so romantic almost. But here's the thing. That's not what it was really like. Not even close. The life of a fisherman on the Sea of Galilee in the first century. It was brutal. It was exhausting. It was dangerous. It was economically crushing. It was socially stigmatizing. And it trapped you from the moment you were born until the day you died. So tonight, I want to take you there, not to the sanitized version you've seen in Sunday school materials, but to the real thing, the smell of fish guts and sweat, the ache in your shoulders from hauling waterlogged nets, the terror of sudden storms that killed your neighbors, the humiliation of handing over most of your catch to tax collectors, the exhaustion of working all night and coming home with nothing. We're going to walk through an entire day in your life as a first-century Galilean fisherman. We'll feel what you felt, see what you saw, understand what you understood. And by the end, you'll know exactly why those first disciples dropped everything when Jesus said, "Follow me." But before we begin, let me invite you to get comfortable, really comfortable. Adjust your pillow. Pull up your blanket. Let your body sink into whatever surface is supporting you right now. You don't need to stay awake for every single detail tonight. In fact, if you drift off somewhere in the middle of this story, that's perfect. That's exactly what this is for. These words will continue whether you're conscious or not. They'll be here, a gentle river of sound carrying you downstream into sleep. So just let go. Let your breathing slow down. Let your mind stop working so hard. We're going back 2,000 years tonight, and there's nowhere you need to be. Nothing you need to do. Just listen and rest, and let the ancient world wash over you like waves on a shore. Take a deep breath in. Hold it for a moment, and let it out slowly. Good. Now, let's go back to the Sea of Galilee, back to a life that was harder than you ever imagined. Here's what we're going to discover together. First, we'll talk about the sea itself, this body of water that wasn't really a sea at all, but a lake with a temperament like a wild animal. We'll learn why it was so dangerous, so unpredictable, so central to everything. Then we'll explore the family business of fishing, because that's what it was. Not a career choice, not a calling, just the work your father did, and his father before him, and his father before that. You were born into it, and you die in it. We'll dive deep into the economics, the taxes, the oppression, the way the entire system was designed to keep you poor and working and desperate. You'll understand exactly how much of your catch you actually got to keep, and it'll shock you. We'll walk through a complete day in your life, starting in the darkness before dawn, the preparation, the rowing out into the black water, the hours and hours of casting nets and hauling them in, the physical exhaustion that never ever went away. We'll experience the storms. Oh, the storms. You've heard about Jesus calming the storm, but you've never really understood how terrifying those storms were. How they appeared out of nowhere. How they killed people regularly. How even experienced fishermen genuinely thought they were going to die. We'll see what happened after you caught fish. The processing, the sorting, the preserving, the calculating of what went to taxes, what went to market, what you could actually take home to feed your family. We'll understand the social realities, the religious complications of handling unclean fish, the smell that marked you wherever you went, the way educated people looked down on you, the limited world you inhabited, with almost no possibility of escape. And then we'll see why it mattered that Jesus chose fishermen, why he went to the docks instead of the synagogue schools, why his first followers were men with calloused hands and tired backs, not scholars with clean robes and impressive credentials. After the main story, we'll explore 3 shorter accounts, 3 moments where the fishing life intersected with the miraculous. The night after the resurrection, when the disciples caught 153 fish, he storm that Jesus slept through, and then commanded into silence, and the bizarre moment when Peter found a coin in a fish's mouth to pay their taxes. By the end, you'll never read those gospel stories the same way again. You'll see them with new eyes, eyes that understand what those men were leaving behind, eyes that recognize the magnitude of their choice, eyes that appreciate just how radical it was for God to show up in their world, in their work, in their struggle. But all of that is ahead of us. For now, just settle in. Let your eyes close if they want to. Let the tensions of your day begin to melt away. We're going back in time now, back to a harder world, a simpler world in some ways, but infinitely more difficult in others. The year is somewhere around 28 A.D., give or take. The place is a small fishing village on the northern shore of the Sea of Galilee, maybe Capernaum, maybe Bethsaida, and you are a fisherman. Let's begin. The first thing you need to know is that the Sea of Galilee isn't actually a sea. Not technically. It's a lake, a freshwater lake, roughly 13 miles from north to south and about 8 miles across at its widest point. You could walk around the entire shoreline in a few days if you wanted to. But nobody called it a lake. Everyone called it a sea. The Sea of Galilee. Sometimes the Sea of Tiberias, after the city Herod Antipas built on the western shore. Sometimes the Lake of Gennesaret, from the fertile plain on the northwestern coast. The old Hebrew name was Kinneret, because from above it supposedly looked like a harp or kinnor. But to you it was just the sea, your sea, the only body of water you'd ever known. And it was beautiful, stunningly beautiful, especially in the early morning when mist rose from the surface and the hills around it were still wrapped in shadow. The water was clear, so clear you could see 10 feet down in some places, clear enough to watch the schools of fish moving beneath your boat like clouds drifting across the sky. The shores were green and lush, at least in spring. Fig trees and olive groves covered the hillsides. Wild flowers, red poppies, yellow chrysanthemums carpeted the ground. There were hot springs along the edges where the water was warm and mineral-rich, and people came from all over to bathe in them for healing. It sat in a valley, this sea of yours, surrounded on all sides by hills and cliffs. To the east, the land rose sharply toward the Golan Heights. To the west, the hills of Lower Galilee rolled away toward Nazareth and eventually the Mediterranean coast. To the north, you could see Mount Hermon in the distance, its peak covered in snow even in summer. To the south, the Jordan River flowed out of the lake and continued its journey down, 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 down toward the Dead Sea. And that's important, that downward part, because the Sea of Galilee sat 700 feet below sea level. 700 feet. It was the lowest freshwater lake on the entire planet, which meant the air was thick and heavy, oxygen-rich, warm, sometimes oppressively hot. In summer, temperatures regularly climbed above 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The sun beat down on the water and turned the whole basin into an oven. There was no escape from it. You couldn't get cool. You just endured it, sweating through your tunic, feeling the heat radiate up from the volcanic rocks on the shore. But at night, the temperature dropped, sometimes dramatically. The air would cool rapidly once the sun set, especially in winter, and this created a problem. You see, the Sea of Galilee sat in what meteorologists today would call a weather bowl. Hills and mountains on every side, funneling wind down into the valley. And when cool air from the mountains collided with warm air rising from the lake, storms appeared. Sudden storms, violent storms. Storms that went from calm water to 10-foot waves in less than 15 minutes. You knew about these storms. Everyone who fished knew about them. Your father had warned you. You'd seen boats capsize. You'd known men who drowned. The sea was beautiful, yes, but it was also a killer. The water itself was fresh and drinkable, fed by underground springs and runoff from the mountains, and it was absolutely teeming with fish. More fish than you could imagine. Dozens of species. The mush, which people today call St. Peter's fish, a type of tilapia with a flat body and large scales. Sardines, small, oily, perfect for preserving. Barbels, a kind of catfish that religious Jews wouldn't eat because it lacked scales and was therefore unclean according to Levitical law. But the fish were why you were here, why your family had been here for generations, why entire villages existed along these shores. The Sea of Galilee was one of the most productive fisheries in the entire Roman world. Fish caught here were salted and exported to Jerusalem, to Syria, to Rome itself. It was an industry, a big industry, and you were part of it, whether you wanted to be or not. Standing on the shore at dawn, you could smell it all. The water had a clean, fresh scent to it, unlike the salty smell of the Mediterranean. But mixed with that was the smell of fish. Always fish. Fish being cleaned, fish being salted, fish drying on racks. The smell of tamarisk trees that grew along the banks. The smell of wet nets and tar used to waterproof boats. The smell of wood smoke from cooking fires. You could hear it too, the lap of small waves against the rocks, the cry of birds' gulls and cormorants diving for their own breakfast, the voices of other fishermen preparing their boats, the creak of wooden oars in their locks, the splash of nets hitting water. This was your world, narrow, bounded, beautiful, and terrible in equal measure. The Sea of Galilee, 13 miles long, 8 miles wide, 700 feet below sea level. And it owned you, completely. You didn't choose to be a fisherman. The choice was made for you the moment you were born. Your father was a fisherman. His father was a fisherman. His father before him was a fisherman. This was the family trade, the family business. And in the first-century world, you didn't just pick a different career. That wasn't how it worked. Let's say your father was named Jonah, and his father was named Zebedee. Your business might literally be called Jonah and Sons, or House of Zebedee. It was a consortium, a partnership. Your father, your uncles, your older brothers, maybe some cousins all working together, sharing boats and nets and the catch. You had your own boat, probably. A boat that had been in the family for years, maybe generations, patched and repaired countless times, 25 to 30 feet long, made from planks of local timber cedar or oak or sycamore. It had a small deck at the stern where one person stood to steer with a long oar. The rest was open, with space for nets and 4 or 5 men rowing. Your boat had a name, though we don't know what fishermen named their boats back then. Maybe after a family member. Maybe after a quality you hoped for, good catch or safe return. You knew every inch of that boat. Every board, every weak spot, every sound it made when it moved through water. As a boy, you'd been on that boat since you were old enough to walk. At first, you just sat and watched, learned to tie knots, learned to read the water. By the time you were 8 or 9 years old, you were working, really working, helping to row, helping to cast the smaller nets, learning the trade that would define your entire existence. Your brothers worked alongside you. If you were lucky, you got along with them. But even if you didn't, you were stuck with them, day after day, night after night, in a boat, in close quarters, for your entire life. And it wasn't just the men. Your mother, your wife, your daughters, they were part of the business too. They didn't go out on the boats, of course. That was men's work. But they did everything else. They mended the nets, and this was constant work. Nets tore every single time you used them. Caught on rocks, ripped by the weight of fish, weakened by water and sun. So the women sat for hours every day with needles and thread, repairing the tiers. It was tedious, intricate work. Their fingers were calloused from it, scarred by the rough fibers. They processed the fish, too. When you brought the catch to shore, they took over. Sorting, gutting, salting, drying, standing at tables or sitting on the ground, knives in hand, scales flying everywhere. They worked as hard as the men did, just in different ways, and they took the fish to market, walked to Capernaum or Magdala, or wherever the market was that day, baskets balanced on their heads, selling what the family could spare after taxes. They haggled with customers. They built relationships with buyers. They kept the money flowing. Without them, the business would collapse, but they never got credit for it. It was Jonah and Sons, not Jonah and sons and daughters and wives. If you had children, and you probably did, if you were old enough to be married, your sons were already learning the trade, following the same path you followed, and your daughters were learning from your wife, preparing to marry into another fishing family and continue the cycle. There was no retirement plan. You fished until your body gave out, until you were too old to row, too weak to haul nets, too slow to keep up. And then you became the one who mended nets on shore, who gave advice, who passed down knowledge. And if you lived long enough, you watched your sons take over, watched them become the primary workers while you faded into the background, and eventually you died, and they kept fishing, and their sons after them. This was the rhythm, the pattern, the trap. What if you didn't want this life? What if you wanted to be a scribe, a scholar, a carpenter, a merchant? Too bad. Leaving the family business was almost unthinkable. It brought shame. It was seen as a betrayal. Your father had invested years in training you. The family depended on your labor. The boat, the nets, the partnerships with other families. These were valuable assets, and you were part of that asset. If you walked away, you'd be cutting yourself off from your family's economic survival. And more than that, you'd be violating the deepest social expectations of your culture. Sons followed fathers. That's just how it was. So you didn't leave. You stayed day after day, year after year, decade after decade. You knew every other fisherman on this coast. They were your cousins, your in-laws, your neighbors, your competitors, your partners. You'd grown up with them. You'd marry your children to their children. You'd work alongside them until one of you died. It was a tight community. It had to be, because no one else understood. The merchants in town, the farmers in the hills, the religious teachers in the synagogue, they didn't know what it was like. They didn't know the exhaustion, the danger, the uncertainty of the catch, the weight of the nets. Only other fishermen knew, so you stuck together. You helped each other when times were hard. You celebrated together when times were good. You mourned together when someone drowned. This was your family, and not just your blood family. Your entire extended network of fishing families, going back generations, connected by marriage and business and shared suffering. And in some ways that made it bearable. You weren't alone. You were part of something bigger than yourself, a tradition, a legacy, a community. But in other ways it made the trap even tighter, because everyone was watching. Everyone had expectations. Everyone knew if you failed to pull your weight. You were born into this, you would die in this, and in between you would fish. That was your life. That was your identity. That was your inheritance. Jonah and sons, Zebedee and sons, whatever your family name was, and you were the and sons part, forever. Now let's talk about money. Or rather, let's talk about how little of it you got to keep. Imagine you've had a good night, a really good night. You and your partners hauled in 100 fish. Nice, big mushed, the kind that sell well in the market. The kind that make you think, just for a moment, that maybe this life isn't so bad after all. 100 fish. That's a lot. That's more than you catch most nights. So how many of those fish do you actually get to keep? Let's break it down. First, there's the Roman tribute tax. Rome controlled this entire region, and they wanted their cut. They taxed everything: land, crops, commerce, and fish. The exact rate varied, but it was somewhere around 25% of your catch. So right away, 25 of your 100 fish belong to Rome. You haven't even pulled the boat onto shore yet, and a quarter of your work is already gone. But we're not done. Because Herod Antipas, the regional tetrarch, also wanted his cut. He ruled Galilee and Perea under Roman authority, and he had his own taxes. Another 20% or so, depending on the year and his current building projects. He was always building something: cities, palaces, theaters, and he needed money to pay for it. So there go 20 more fish. You're down to 55 now. Then there's the fishing license. Oh yes, you needed a license to fish in these waters, because technically the lake belonged to Herod. He controlled the rights to the fishery. So you paid him for the privilege of catching fish in your own ancestral waters. This might be a flat fee, Or it might be another percentage. Let's say it's another 10% of your catch. 10 more fish gone. You're at 45 now. From 100 fish, you're down to 45. But wait, there's also the temple tax. Every adult Jewish male was required to pay a half shekel per year to support the temple in Jerusalem. This was a religious obligation, yes, but it was also enforced. You had to pay it. And if you didn't have coins, you paid it in goods, like fish, and there were other local taxes. Tolls for using the roads to transport your fish. Fees for selling in the market. Payments to the local synagogue. It added up. It always added up. By the time all the taxes were paid, you were lucky to keep 30% to 40% of what you caught. From 100 fish, you might keep 30, maybe 35 if you were fortunate, and the tax collectors were in a good mood. And that was before any of your actual costs. Maintaining the boat, replacing nets when they wore out completely, buying rope, buying the tar and pitch to waterproof the hull, paying hired hands if you had any. The system was designed to keep you poor, or at least to keep you from ever getting comfortable. You couldn't save. You couldn't build up a reserve. You were always just barely making it. And the worst part, the tax collection system itself. Rome didn't collect taxes directly. Instead, they auctioned off the right to collect taxes to private individuals. These people were called tax farmers or publicans. They paid Rome a certain amount up front for the right to collect taxes in a region, and then they collected as much as they could and kept everything above what they'd paid Rome. So the tax collectors had a built-in incentive to squeeze you as hard as possible. The more they collected, the more profit they made. And who were these tax collectors? Your fellow Jews, men from your own community who had essentially become collaborators with Rome. They got rich by making their neighbors poor. This is why tax collectors were so universally hated, why they were considered traitors and sinners, why no respectable Jew would eat with them or welcome them into their homes. They were working for the occupation. They were profiting from the suffering of their own people, and they were at the docks every single day when you came in, waiting, watching, counting your fish. Sometimes they inspected your nets to make sure you weren't hiding part of your catch. Sometimes they had soldiers with them to enforce compliance. Sometimes they just stood there with their tablets and their scales, calculating what you owed. You had no choice but to pay. If you didn't, they could confiscate your boat. They could throw you in debtor's prison until your family scraped together the money to pay. They could make your life even worse than it already was. So you paid. You handed over fish after fish after fish. You watched the fruits of your labor, the result of a full night of back-breaking work, disappear into their baskets. And then you took what was left and hoped it would be enough to feed your family for another day. But even after you paid the taxes, you weren't done with the economic pressures, because you probably didn't own your boat outright. Not if you were young. Not if you were just starting out. Boats were expensive. Nets were expensive. Equipment was expensive. So many fishing families operated on borrowed capital. Someone with money, maybe a wealthy landowner, maybe a merchant, would front the money for boats and nets. And in exchange, they took a percentage of the catch, forever. Or maybe you were just a hired hand. Maybe you didn't own any equipment at all. Maybe you worked on someone else's boat for a daily wage, a wage that barely covered food and rent. This was the situation Peter and Andrew were in. according to the gospel accounts. They worked for Zebedee, the father of James and John. They were employees, not owners, which meant their economic position was even more precarious than most. You could work your whole life and never get ahead. The debts accumulated. The taxes kept coming. The equipment wore out and needed replacing. And you were always scrambling to make ends meet. The fish market in Magdala, just a few miles down the coast, was famous throughout the empire. They had massive fish salting facilities there, huge stone pools where fish were preserved and packed for export. Archaeologists have found these installations. They were enormous, industrial-scale operations, and all that fish went somewhere, to Damascus, to Jerusalem, to Rome. It made someone wealthy, but it wasn't you. It wasn't the fisherman who actually caught the fish. You were the labor, the expendable labor, the people who did the dangerous, exhausting work while others profited from it. This was the system, and it was rigged against you from the start. So when you heard about Jesus talking about the kingdom of God, about a new way of living, about the poor being blessed, and the first becoming last and the last becoming first, it probably sounded pretty good, because you were definitely last. The system had made sure of that, and you'd been last for a very long time. Let's walk through an actual day, a typical day, the kind of day you lived over and over again. It starts in darkness, complete darkness, because you wake up around 3 o'clock or 3:30 in the morning. Maybe 4 o'clock if you're sleeping in, which you never do. You wake in your house, a small stone or mud brick house with thick walls and a flat roof. 2 rooms, maybe 3 if your family has done well. You sleep on a mat on the floor. Your wife sleeps beside you. Your children are curled up on their own mats nearby. Maybe your parents or grandparents are in the other room. 3 generations under one small roof. There's no alarm clock, obviously. You just wake up. Your body has learned the rhythm over the years. You've done this so many times that some internal mechanism jolts you awake while it's still the deepest part of night. For a moment you lie there. Your back hurts. It always hurts. Years of rowing, years of hauling wet nets, years of sleeping on a thin mat on a hard floor. Your shoulders are stiff. Your hands ache. You're tired. Still tired from yesterday, from the day before, from 20 years of this work. But you get up anyway, because you have to. You move quietly, trying not to wake everyone else. You feel your way through the darkness to where you left your tunic and cloak. You pull them on. The fabric is rough, worn thin in places, stained with fish, scales, and salt. You make your way outside. The air is cool, sometimes cold, especially in winter. You can see stars, so many stars, more than you'd ever see today with all our light pollution. The Milky Way is a river of light across the sky. It's beautiful, and you've seen it 10,000 times, and you barely notice anymore. Your wife is up too now. She's stirring the fire, coaxing embers back to life. She'll prepare a small meal. Bread, always bread, probably left over from yesterday. Maybe some dried fish. Maybe olives or a handful of dates. Maybe cheese if you have any. Something to fill your stomach before the work begins. You eat quickly. There's not much conversation. Everyone is still half asleep. The food is simple, familiar, not particularly good. You're eating for fuel, not pleasure. While you eat, you're thinking about the night ahead. You're reading the signs. What did the sky look like at sunset? What direction was the wind blowing? What did the water look like when you passed it yesterday? You're trying to predict what the sea will do tonight, trying to decide where to fish, trying to guess whether it'll be a good catch or another wasted night. You've learned to read weather over the years. You can look at the clouds and know if a storm is coming. You can feel the humidity in the air and know if the fish will rise to the surface or stay deep. You can watch the wind and know if it's safe to go out or if you should stay home. This knowledge has been passed down through generations. Your father taught you. His father taught him. It's not written down anywhere. It's just known, felt, understood instinctually after years and years on the water. When you're done eating, you gather your things. You check your cloak, you'll need it later when the temperature drops over the water. You make sure your head covering is secure. You look at your hands. They're already scarred and calloused, but they'll take more damage tonight. You say a brief goodbye to your wife. She doesn't say much. This is routine. You've said this goodbye 1,000 times, but there's always an unspoken awareness underneath it. Men drown on the Sea of Galilee. It happens. You both know it could happen to you, so the goodbye, brief as it is, carries weight. Your children are still asleep. You don't wake them. They'll have their own early mornings soon enough. You step out into the street. It's not really a street, more like a narrow path between houses. Everything is built close together in these fishing villages. Stone walls, flat roofs, small doorways. The village is mostly quiet, but you can hear other fishermen stirring, doors opening, quiet voices, the shuffle of feet on dirt paths. You make your way toward the water. You've walked this path so many times that you don't need light to see where you're going. You know every dip, every stone, every turn. As you get closer to the shore, you can smell it. The sea, the fish, the tar on the boats, the wet wood. It's a smell that never leaves you. It's in your clothes, in your hair, in your skin. You smell like fish all the time. Everyone knows you're a fisherman just by standing near you. Other men are gathering at the boats. You can see them now, vague shapes in the starlight. You recognize them by their silhouettes, by their voices, by the way they move. These are your partners, your cousins, your crew. Shalom, someone says quietly. Shalom, you reply. There's not much conversation. Not yet. Everyone is still waking up. Everyone is still gathering their energy for the night ahead. You move toward your boat. Your hands find the familiar wood in the darkness. You run your palm along the side, checking by touch. Any damage from yesterday? Any weak spots you need to watch? No, it seems fine. You check the oars. Make sure they're there. Make sure they're solid. You check the mast. You won't raise the sail tonight. It's not that kind of fishing, but you check it anyway, out of habit. Someone is checking the nets. These are huge nets, the drag nets, the seine nets. They can be 100 feet long or more. They're made from linen or hemp, woven by hand, knotted at every intersection, and they're heavy. Even dry, a net weighs as much as a man. Wet, it weighs far more. The nets are spread out on the shore, being inspected, looking for tears, for weak spots, for anything that might break during the night. Your wife and the other women mended them yesterday, but you check again anyway. Out on the water, a torn net means a lost catch, and a lost catch means no food, no income, more debt. Everything seems in order. The boats are ready. The nets are ready. The crew is ready. Someone makes a decision. Let's go. You and the others push the boat into the water. It's heavy, loaded with nets and men. The water is cold around your ankles, then your knees. You heave the boat forward until it floats freely, and then you climb in. Your sandals are wet now. They'll stay wet all night. Your feet will be cold. But you're used to it. Someone takes the steering oar at the stern. The others settle into position on the rowing benches. You take up your oar. The wood is smooth from years of use, worn to fit your grip perfectly. And then you begin to row, pulling away from shore, out into the darkness, out onto the sea. The sky is starting to lighten just barely in the east, but it's still mostly dark. The water is black beneath you. You can hear it lapping against the hull. You can hear the rhythmic splash of oars. You can hear breathing your own, the others. You row in silence mostly. The rhythm is automatic. Pull, lift, reach, pull, over and over. Your shoulders start to warm up. The stiffness fades. The muscle memory takes over. Other boats are going out too. You can hear them in the darkness. The splash of their oars, the creak of their hulls. Everyone is heading to their preferred fishing grounds. Some go north, some go south, some stay close to shore. Some head toward the middle of the lake. You're heading wherever your father always went, wherever his father went before him, the same spots, the same strategies, the same hope that tonight will be different from all the other nights when you caught nothing. The village is behind you now. The shore is a dark line in the distance. You're alone on the water, alone with your crew, alone with your boat, alone with the fish somewhere below. The real work is about to begin, but first you row, and row, and row, out into the darkness, out into the unknown, out into another night of labor that might yield everything or nothing. This is how it starts, every single day, in darkness, in cold, in weariness that never fully leaves. This is your life, and the night has only just begun. You row for what feels like forever, maybe 30 minutes, maybe an hour. Time is strange out here in the dark. You're aiming for a spot, you know, a place where the fish tend to gather, maybe near a rocky outcropping on the bottom, maybe where cold springs feed into the lake, maybe just a place that's always been good, except when it isn't, which is often. Finally, someone makes the call. Here, the rowing stops, the boat drifts. The water laps gently against the sides. You can hear the other boats nearby, though you can barely see them. This is a coordinated effort. Multiple boats working together, because that's how you catch fish. Not alone. Together. Now comes the net. You and your crew start hauling it out. The dragnet, the seine, it's coiled in the bottom of the boat, and you lift it carefully, checking one more time for tears as you go. The net is rough against your palms. The knots are hard. Your hands are tough, but they'll still be raw by the end of the night. Someone takes the lead rope and holds it. You start feeding the net over the side of the boat into the water. It sinks slowly, weighted along the bottom edge with stones or lead weights. The top edge has cork or wooden floats to keep it near the surface. The idea is to create a wall of netting in the water, a curtain, and then you either wait for fish to swim into it or you actively drive them toward it. Tonight you're driving them, which means coordinated effort. Your boat and another boat spread the net between you. each holding one end. The net forms a long line in the water. Then a third boat positions itself on the far side of the net and makes noise, splashing oars in the water, hitting the sides of the boat. Anything to create vibrations that will scare the fish. Fish feel vibrations through their lateral lines. They sense the disturbance and swim away from it, hopefully toward your net, hopefully in enough numbers to make this worth it. You wait, holding the rope, feeling for any tug, any tension that might indicate fish hitting the net. The water is dark beneath you. You can't see anything. You're fishing by feel, by sound, by instinct. Minutes pass, maybe 10, maybe 20. You're holding the rope, and your hands are starting to cramp. The cold is seeping into your fingers. The wet has soaked through your tunic where you've leaned against the side of the boat. Then, something. A slight pull on the rope. Then another. The net is growing heavier. We have something, someone says quietly. Now comes the hard part, the really hard part. You start hauling the net in, hand over hand, pulling the rope. The net comes up slowly from the water, and it's heavy. So heavy, because water makes everything heavier. A net that weighs 60 pounds dry can weigh 300 pounds wet. Add fish to it, and you're pulling up 400 pounds or more. Your shoulders burn, your back strains. Your hands grip the rough rope, pulling, pulling, pulling. You brace your feet against the ribs of the boat for leverage. You lean back with your whole body weight. The person next to you is doing the same thing, and the person in the other boat. Everyone pulling together, rhythmically, steadily, because if you stop, you'll lose everything. The net will sink back down. The fish will escape, so you don't stop. You pull, even when your muscles scream, even when your hands feel like they're going to tear open, even when your breath comes in gasps. The net breaks the surface. Water streams off it, and there gleaming in the faint pre-dawn light are fish, dozens of them, trapped in the mesh, thrashing desperate. You keep pulling, getting the net into the boat, trying not to let any fish slip back through. This is chaotic now. Everyone is moving fast, grabbing fish, untangling them from the net, throwing them into the bottom of the boat where they flop and gasp. Your hands are covered in scales, slippery. The fish are muscular and strong, fighting even as they die slowly in the air. Some of them have sharp fins that cut you. You barely notice. You're too focused on getting every single fish out of that net. Finally, the net is empty. You've pulled in maybe 40 fish, 50. It's hard to count in the chaos, but it's something. It's a catch. For a moment, you feel a flicker of satisfaction. This is what it's supposed to feel like. This is why you do this. The catch, the proof that the night wasn't wasted. But there's no time to rest. You gather the net again, check it for damage. 2 tears, small ones, but they'll need mending. You make a mental note. Your wife will repair them later. And then you do it again. Spread the net. Wait. Haul it in. This time, nothing. Maybe 5 fish, maybe 10. Not enough. You try again. Another spot. Another cast. Another hour of rowing and spreading and waiting and hauling. Nothing. The sky is lighter now. Dawn is coming. And dawn is both good and bad. Good because you can actually see what you're doing. Bad because fish don't rise to the surface as much once the sun is up. They go deeper where the water is cooler, where predators can't see them as easily. Your window is closing. You try again. Cast the net. This time you can see it spreading out in the water, a ghostly curtain just beneath the surface. You watch. Wait. A small tug. You haul it in. Maybe 20 fish this time. Better. Not great, but better. The sun is rising now. The sky is turning pink and gold. The hills around the lake are becoming visible. Other boats are heading back to shore. Some of them look heavy and the water loaded with fish. Others sit high, barely weighted down at all. You've had a mediocre night. Not terrible, not great, just mediocre, which is the most common kind. You've caught maybe 75 fish total. After hours and hours of rowing, casting, hauling, rowing again, casting again, hauling again. Your body is exhausted. Your hands are bleeding in a few places where the rope cut through the calluses. Your shoulders feel like they're on fire. Your back is a solid knot of pain. But you have 75 fish. And that's something. You turn the boat back toward shore. The rowing is harder now because you're tired. Everything hurts. You're moving on autopilot. Muscle memory carrying you through the motions because your mind is too exhausted to direct your body anymore. The sun is fully up by the time you reach the shore. The beach is crowded now with boats being pulled onto the sand. Women and children are there, waiting, ready to process the catch. You beach the boat. Climb out into the shallow water. Your legs are stiff. They don't want to hold your weight at first. You stumble, catch yourself, push forward. Other fishermen are nearby. Some are celebrating a good catch. Others are silent, grim-faced. Bad nights happen. They happen more often than good nights, honestly. You're all at the mercy of the fish, and the fish don't care about your needs. You start unloading, handing fish up to your wife, to your daughters, to whoever is helping today. They take them to the processing area. You help drag the nets out of the boat. Spread them on the beach so they can dry a bit before being checked and mended. Your part of the work is done. For now, but the night has taken its toll. You're wet. You're cold despite the rising sun. You're exhausted. Your hands hurt. Your body hurts. And you know you'll do it all again tomorrow night. And the night after that. And the night after that. This is fishing. This is what it actually looks like. Not peaceful boats on calm water at sunset, but hours of brutal physical labor in the dark, hauling waterlogged nets that weigh hundreds of pounds, gambling everything on the hope that the fish will be where you need them to be. Sometimes they are. Often they're not. And either way, you still have to haul the nets. You still have to row. You still have to endure the cold and the wet and the exhaustion, again and again and again and again, until your body breaks, until you can't do it anymore, until someone younger takes your place. This is fishing on the Sea of Galilee, and it sucked. It really, really sucked. But the hard work, that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was the storms. Let me tell you about the storms on the Sea of Galilee, because until you understand them, you can't understand why the disciples were so terrified that night when Jesus was sleeping in the boat. You can't understand why they thought they were going to die. You can't understand why, when Jesus stood up and commanded the wind and waves to be still, they were more afraid after than they were during the storm. The Sea of Galilee sits in a bowl. We talked about this earlier. Hills and mountains on every side. And it sits 700 feet below sea level, which means the air is heavy and warm. But the surrounding mountains, Especially the Golan Heights to the east are high and cold, especially at night. So here's what happens. The warm air over the lake rises. Physics demands it. Warm air is less dense, so it goes up. And when that warm air rises, it creates a low-pressure area. Nature abhors a vacuum, so air rushes in from the surrounding mountains to fill that space. Cold air, dense air, heavy air. It comes pouring down the ravines and valleys like water through a funnel. It accelerates as it descends, and when it hits the lake, it creates wind. Violent, sudden, unpredictable wind. These storms appear out of nowhere. You can be rowing along on calm water, barely a ripple on the surface, and within 10 or 15 minutes, you're fighting for your life. The wind comes first, a gust that rocks the boat. Then another gust, stronger. Then it's constant, howling, tearing at your clothes and your hair, and your sail if you're foolish enough to have it raised. And then the waves start, small at first, then bigger still. The Sea of Galilee is shallow in places, only about 150 feet at its deepest. Shallow water means waves can grow tall quickly. 10 feet, 12 feet. In a boat that's only 27 feet long and sits low in the water, a 10-foot wave is a mountain. The boat pitches wildly. Bow up, stern down, then stern up, bow down. You're holding on to anything you can grab. The oars are useless. You can't row in this. You can't steer. You can only try to keep the boat pointed into the waves so it doesn't flip. Water comes over the sides. Cold water, wave after wave. It pools in the bottom of the boat. Someone is bailing frantically with anything they can find ajar, a bowl, their hands. But more water keeps coming in faster than you can bail it out. And it's dark. These storms usually happen at night. So you can't see the waves coming. You just feel the boat lurch, and then water crashes over you, and you're soaked and freezing, and the wind is so loud you can't hear anyone shouting. You lose all sense of direction. You don't know which way the shore is. You can't see any landmarks. The sky and the water blend into one black chaos. You're completely disoriented. And you absolutely know that people die in these storms regularly. Every fisherman on this lake knows someone who drowned, someone who didn't make it back, someone whose boat capsized or smashed into rocks or simply sank under the weight of water. You've seen it happen. Maybe not up close, but you've seen the aftermath. A boat washed up on shore, splintered. Bodies recovered days later, bloated and pale. Families wailing in grief. Widows and orphans left behind with no income, no support, no future. So when you're in the storm, the fear is absolutely rational. This isn't paranoia. This isn't irrational terror. This is experienced fishermen who know exactly how dangerous this is, understanding that they might genuinely be about to die. Your heart is pounding. Your breath comes in gasps. Your hands are numb from cold and from gripping the sides of the boat. You're praying. Everyone is praying, shouting prayers into the wind. God, save us. Please, don't let us die. Not like this. And the storm doesn't care. It keeps raging. The waves keep coming. The wind keeps howling. This is what it was like that night when Jesus was with them, the famous story. They were crossing the lake, maybe from Capernaum on the north shore to the region of the Gerasenes on the eastern shore, about 5 or 6 miles of open water. And Jesus was asleep. asleep in the stern of the boat on a cushion while a life-threatening storm raged around him. Think about that for a second. Jesus was so exhausted from teaching and healing that he fell asleep and stayed asleep, even as the boat pitched and rolled, even as water splashed over him, even as his disciples panicked around him. The disciples were terrified. The text says they were terrified. And these were fishermen. These were men who had been on this lake their entire lives. If they were terrified, the situation was genuinely dire. Finally, they woke him up. "Teacher, don't you care that we're drowning?" And Jesus stood up in the rocking boat. In the chaos, he stood up and he spoke to the storm. "Quiet, be still." And it stopped. Just like that, instantly, the wind died. The waves flattened. The sea became perfectly calm, which is not how weather works. Storms don't stop on a dime. Even after the wind dies down, the waves continue for a while. Water has momentum. It takes time to settle. But this settled immediately, like someone flipped a switch. Wind, waves, terror. And then nothing. Silence, stillness, calm. And the disciples' reaction is fascinating. They didn't relax. They didn't breathe a sigh of relief. They became more afraid. "Who is this?" they asked each other. "Even the wind and the waves obey him." Because they had just witnessed something that violated every natural law they understood. They had just seen nature itself submit to a command from a human voice, and they didn't know what to do with that. The storm had terrified them, but Jesus terrified them more, because a storm is just weather. Dangerous, yes. Deadly, yes, but understandable, natural, part of the world they knew. But a man who commands storms, that's something else entirely. That's power on a different level. That's divine. That's frightening in a completely different way. They had been afraid they would die. Now they were afraid of the person who had saved them. And maybe that's the appropriate response. Maybe awe and fear are the right reactions when you encounter the kind of power that can speak to chaos and make it stop. But all of that theology and wonder and fear rests on understanding what those storms were actually like. How dangerous, how sudden, how deadly. The disciples weren't overreacting. They weren't being dramatic. They were legitimately convinced they were about to die. Because in storms like that, people did die. All the time. And that's why the miracle mattered so much. Because Jesus didn't just make their lives more comfortable. He didn't just save them some inconvenience. He saved their lives. He stopped something that absolutely would have killed them. Every fisherman on the Sea of Galilee knew what those storms could do. They had the statistics written in grief on their faces. The widows, the orphans, the empty places at the table where fathers and brothers used to sit. The sea was beautiful, but it was also a killer, and it killed without warning, without mercy, without regard for your experience or your skill or your prayers, unless apparently the Son of God told it not to. And then it stopped, immediately, completely, just stopped. Who is this indeed? Who is this that even the wind and waves obey him? That's the question. And it's the question that changes everything. But the storms were real. The danger was real. The terror was justified. And the fishermen who survived them carried that knowledge in their bodies, in their muscle memory, in the way they read the sky, in the way they never fully relaxed when they were on the water. because the sea could turn on you at any moment. And when it did, all you could do was hold on and pray and hope that this time, you'd make it back to shore. Most of the time you did, but not always. Not always. So you've made it back to shore. The sun is fully up now, warming the air, burning off the early morning chill. You're exhausted. You've been working for hours. You're wet, you're cold, you're hungry, and every muscle in your body is screaming. And the work is nowhere close to done, because now you have 75 fish. And fish don't stay fresh. Not in this heat. Not without refrigeration. So everything that happens next has to happen fast. The women take over now. Your wife, your daughters, your mother if she's still alive and able to work, your sisters, the women of the other fishing families. They've been waiting on the beach, and now they move into action. First, the fish have to be sorted. This is more complex than you might think. Jewish dietary law, the laws of kashrut, are very specific about which fish you can eat and which you can't. Clean fish have fins and scales. Unclean fish don't. Leviticus 11 is clear about this. If it doesn't have both fins and scales, it's unclean. It's forbidden. You can't eat it, and more importantly, you can't sell it to other Jews. So the sorting begins. The mushed, what we'd call St. Peter's fish today, a kind of talapi, those are clean. They have fins and obvious scales. Those go in one pile. The sardines, those are clean too, fins and scales. Another pile. But then there are the barbels, a kind of catfish. No scales. Those are unclean. They go in a different pile. You can sell those to Gentiles, to the Greek cities on the eastern shore, to the Roman soldiers, but not to your fellow Jews. There are also eels sometimes, definitely unclean, and various other bottom feeders, all unclean. So you sort, clean, unclean. Then within the clean category, you sort by size. Big fish sell for more than small fish. You're already calculating in your head. The bigger ones will go to market. The medium ones might be saved for special occasions. The smallest ones, those might just become family meals. While the sorting happens, you're dealing with the nets, spreading them out on the beach or on racks, checking every inch for tears. And there are always tears. The rocks on the bottom of the lake, the weight of the fish, the stress of hauling nets tear constantly. You find the tears, and you mark them. Later today, this afternoon, when you're trying to rest before tonight's work, the women will sit and mend every single one. Thread a needle with cord, tie knots, recreate the mesh pattern. It's tedious, careful work. It has to be done right or the net won't hold. But back to the fish. They've been sorted. Now they need to be processed. And this is where it gets messy. The women sit at tables, rough wooden tables, or just flat stones with knives, sharp iron knives. And they gut the fish, one after another. Grab a fish, slice it open belly to throat. Pull out the guts, toss them aside, rinse the cavity. Move to the next fish. Their hands move fast. They've done this their entire lives. They can gut a fish in seconds without even looking. Just muscle memory. Grab, cut, pull, rinse next. The fish guts pile up. They smell. Oh, they smell. In the heat of the rising sun, that smell gets worse quickly. Eventually, someone will gather them up and bury them or throw them somewhere away from the village. But for now, they just pile up, attracting flies. The blood runs down the tables, into the sand, into the water at the edge of the lake. The beach is stained with it. Your hands are stained with it. Everything is covered in fish scales. They stick to your clothes, your skin, your hair. They shimmer in the sunlight like tiny mirrors. Once the fish are gutted, they need to be preserved, because again, no refrigeration. The only way to keep fish from rotting in this heat is to salt them or dry them. Most fish get salted. There are large clay jars or stone basins filled with salt, not just a little salt. A lot of salt, coarse salt, from the Dead Sea, brought up in caravans. You pack the fish in layers. A layer of salt, a layer of fish, a layer of salt, a layer of fish. The salt draws out the moisture. It preserves the flesh. Salted fish can last for months. This is what made Magdala famous. The city of Magdala, just down the coast from Capernaum, had huge fish salting facilities. Archaeologists have found them massive stone pools cut into the bedrock, designed to hold thousands of pounds of fish. This was an industrial operation. Magdala's salted fish were exported all over the Roman Empire. The name Magdala might even come from the Hebrew word migdal, meaning tower, referring to the towers used for drying fish. Or it might come from a word related to salting or processing. Either way, the whole city's economy was built on preserved fish. Your family doesn't operate on that scale. You're just one household among many, but you do the same basic process. Salt the fish, pack them in jars, seal the jars, store them until market day. Some fish get dried instead, hung on racks in the sun. The heat and the air slowly desiccate them. Dried fish are lighter, easier to transport, and they last even longer than salted fish. But they take longer to prepare, and they're not as popular in the local markets. Either way, salting or drying, it all takes time. Hours. The women work through the morning and into the afternoon. And while they work, that smell, it permeates everything. The smell of fish and blood and salt and sun-heated flesh. You smell it constantly. It's in the air you breathe. It's soaked into your clothes. No amount of washing really gets it out. People in town can smell you coming. They know you're a fisherman before you even open your mouth. It's a stigma, a social marker. You're one of the fish people, the people who stink, the people who work with dead things, the people who are ritually unclean more often than not because you're constantly handling fish that might be unclean or getting covered in blood and guts. But there's no choice. This is the work. This is how you survive. So you endure the smell, the stigma, the disgust on people's faces when you walk into the synagogue or the market square. By midday, most of the processing is done. The fish are salted or drying. The unsalted ones, the ones you'll eat soon, are set aside. Maybe your wife will cook some for the midday meal, grilled over an open fire. Simple, direct. And now comes the calculation. The economic calculation that determines whether you eat well this week or go hungry. Of your 75 fish, maybe 15 were unclean. You'll sell those to Gentiles for less money than the clean fish would bring. That leaves 60 clean fish. Of those 60, the taxes take their cut. Let's say it's a third. 20 fish go to the tax collector who's been waiting on the beach this whole time, watching, counting, making sure you don't try to hide anything. That leaves 40 fish. Of those 40, 10 of the best ones will go to market. Your wife will take them to town, to the fish sellers, and haggle for the best price. Maybe she gets a decent amount, maybe not. Depends on how many other fishermen had good catches last night. If everyone did well, prices drop. Supply and demand. That leaves 30 fish. And of those, maybe you set aside 10 for your own consumption. Food for your family over the next few days. That leaves 20 fish. And those might go to pay debts, to repay the loan on your boat, to pay the fee for your fishing license, to contribute to the synagogue, to cover the costs of replacing worn-out rope or patching the sail. By the time it's all calculated, you've worked all night, hauled hundreds of pounds of wet nets, risked your life on dangerous water, and you end up with maybe enough to get by. Maybe a tiny bit extra if you're lucky. Probably not. And tomorrow night you'll do it all again. Because you have to. Because the debts don't go away. Because your family still needs to eat. Because this is the only life you know. The women finish their work. They wash their hands in the lake water. They wipe sweat from their foreheads. They're exhausted too. They've been on their feet for hours, bending over tables, cutting and gutting and salting. Everyone is exhausted. Everyone smells like fish. Everyone's hands are raw. And the sun is high now. It's hot, really hot. And you've been up since before dawn, working nonstop. You need sleep, desperately, but you probably won't get much. Maybe a couple hours in the heat of the day. Then you'll wake up, and it'll be time to check the nets, to prepare the boat, to get ready to go out again tonight. Because the sea doesn't care if you're tired. The fish don't care if you're exhausted. The tax collectors don't care if you're barely surviving. You fish, you process, you pay, you sleep a little. And then you do it all over again, day after day, week after week, year after year, until you can't anymore. This is the life. This is the grind. This is what it meant to be a fisherman on the Sea of Galilee. And now you understand. Now you see why it sucked. Really, truly sucked. But we're not done yet. There's more to understand. More layers to this life. More reasons why these men were ready to drop everything when Jesus said, "Follow me." So let's keep going. Let's go deeper. Let's see what else made this life so hard. Let's talk about where you fit in society. Because being a fisherman wasn't just about the physical work or the economic struggle. It was also about your social position, your status, how other people saw you and treated you. And the truth is, you were looked down on, not by everyone, but by the people who mattered in the religious and social hierarchy. Start with the obvious. You smelled like fish. All the time. No matter how much you washed, no matter how many times you changed your clothes, the smell was in your skin, in your hair, in your pores. You couldn't escape it. And in close-quarter societies like first-century Jewish villages, smell mattered. When you walked into the synagogue for Sabbath services, people noticed. They moved away slightly. They wrinkled their noses. Not always obviously, not always rudely, but you could tell. You were marked, identified. You were one of the fish people. Then there was the issue of ritual purity. This was huge in first-century Judaism. Being ritually clean or unclean determined whether you could participate in religious life, whether you could enter certain spaces, whether you could eat with certain people. And as a fisherman, you were constantly becoming ritually unclean. Here's how. Remember the sorting? Clean fish versus unclean fish? Well, if you touched an unclean fish, a catfish, an eel, anything without fins and scales, you became ritually unclean. Leviticus 11:10-12 is explicit about this. So every time you hauled in your nets, you were handling clean and unclean fish together. You couldn't avoid touching the unclean ones, which meant you became unclean every single day. To become clean again, you had to wash. A ritual washing, a mikvah, a bath of purification. And yes, there were mikvot, plural, in fishing villages. Archaeologists have found them. But the point is, you were constantly in this cycle of becoming unclean and having to purify yourself. This set you apart from scribes and Pharisees, who could maintain ritual purity much more easily. They worked with scrolls, with teaching, with study. They weren't constantly covered in fish guts and blood. And this mattered because ritual purity was associated with holiness, with being close to God, with being righteous. If you were constantly unclean, well, what did that say about you spiritually? Now, to be fair, the religious authorities didn't say you were a bad person just because you were a fisherman. But there was definitely a hierarchy, a sense that some occupations were more honorable than others. At the top were the priests and Levites. They served in the temple. They were set apart, holy, dedicated to God. Then came the scribes and Pharisees, the teachers, the scholars, the people who studied Torah day and night. They were respected, admired, looked up to. Then came merchants and craftsmen, people with skills, people who made things or traded things, respectable middle-class work. Then came farmers, the backbone of the economy, hard workers, not wealthy, but necessary. And then came you, fishermen, shepherds, day laborers, the Haaretz people of the land, the uneducated, the ones who worked with their hands in dirty, smelly jobs. You weren't at the very bottom. That was reserved for beggars, lepers, prostitutes, tax collectors, and Gentiles. But you were pretty far down the ladder, and the attitude toward the Haaretz from the religious elite could be dismissive. There are passages in the Talmud, written later, but reflecting earlier attitudes that are pretty harsh. Things like, do not eat with an Haaretz, or do not entrust a secret to an Haaretz. The assumption was that you were ignorant, that you didn't know Torah, that you couldn't possibly understand the finer points of religious law because you were too busy fishing to study, and there was some truth to that. You didn't have time to study. You were working all night, sleeping a few hours during the day, mending nets, processing fish. When were you supposed to memorize Scripture? Sure, you went to synagogue on the Sabbath. You heard the Torah read. You listened to the teachings. But you weren't a scholar. You didn't have the leisure time or the education to become one. So when Pharisees looked at you, they saw someone who was lesser, not evil necessarily, but rough, unrefined, spiritually unimpressive. And maybe they were right to some degree. You probably did swear more than you should. You probably drank more than was wise after a particularly hard week. You probably had a temper all that frustration and exhaustion had to go somewhere. You were rough around the edges. You and your fellow fishermen. You were tough men doing tough work, and you didn't always have the patience for religious niceties. But here's the thing. You still believed. You still prayed. You still observed the Sabbath, kept the major festivals, honored God as best you knew how. You just did it while smelling like fish and being constantly tired and not always measuring up to the standards of people who had never hauled a wet net in their lives. And your children? Their prospects were limited too. Your sons would be fishermen like you. That was almost guaranteed. They weren't going to become scribes or Pharisees. They didn't have the education, the connections, the social standing. Your daughters would marry fishermen or other manual laborers. They'd work just as hard as their mothers, process fish, mend nets, raise children who would do the same. There was no social mobility, no ladder to climb. You were born into this class, and you would die in this class, and your children would follow the same path, unless something dramatic happened, unless someone from outside your social circle saw value in you that the religious establishment didn't see, which is exactly what Jesus did. Think about it. When Jesus wanted to choose his closest followers, the 12 who would be with him constantly, who would learn from him, who would eventually spread his message to the world, he didn't go to the synagogue schools. He didn't approach the most promising young scribes. He went to the docks. He went to the beach. He went to where the fishermen were. "Follow me," he said to Peter and Andrew, "and I will make you fishers of men." He chose the ones who smelled like fish, the ones who were rough and uneducated and ritually unclean half the time, the ones at the bottom of the social hierarchy. And this was shocking. This was offensive to the religious establishment. Who were these men? What qualified them? They didn't have the right credentials, the right background, the right purity. But Jesus saw something else. He saw men who knew how to work hard, who understood teamwork, who were familiar with risk and danger, who were desperate enough for something better that they'd be willing to drop everything and follow. He saw potential that the Pharisees had missed. Or maybe he saw that social status and ritual purity and religious credentials weren't actually what mattered most. Maybe what mattered was a willingness to listen, to learn, to change, to leave behind the familiar, even when the familiar was hard, and step into something new. The fishermen could do that. They were already used to discomfort, to uncertainty, to working when the outcome wasn't guaranteed, and so Jesus chose them, the fish people, the smelly, uneducated, ritually questionable laborers from the docks, and he made them apostles, leaders, foundations of his church, not despite their background, but maybe in some ways because of it, because they knew struggle. They knew what it meant to work all night and catch nothing. They knew exhaustion and failure and the constant weight of economic pressure. They knew in their bones what it meant to need rescue, to need hope, to need someone to say, "There's a better way. Follow me." So they did. They followed. And the world was never the same. But to understand why they followed, you have to understand what they were leaving. Not just the boats and nets, though those were significant, but also the social position, the identity, the expectations. They were walking away from everything that defined them, everything that their families expected, everything that their society told them they were supposed to be. That takes courage, or desperation, or a combination of both. And fishermen on the Sea of Galilee, they had plenty of both. Let's talk about daily life beyond the fishing itself. Because when you weren't on the boat or processing the catch, you still had a life to live, a home, a family, routines, and all of it was simpler, harder, and more exhausting than anything most of us can imagine today. Your house, it was small, really small, Maybe 300 square feet total if you were doing well. Maybe less if you weren't. It was made of stone or mud brick. Thick walls to keep out the heat in summer and the cold in winter. A flat roof made of wooden beams covered with branches and packed clay. You could walk on the roof. In fact, you used it as extra living space, a place to sleep on hot nights, a place to dry food, a place to sit in the evening when the house felt too cramped. There were openings, not really windows, more like small holes in the walls for ventilation. Maybe one door, low and narrow, with a wooden frame and a curtain or simple door. Inside there were 2 or 3 rooms. Maybe a main room where everyone ate and worked during the day. Maybe a smaller room where you slept at night. Maybe a storage area for jars of grain and oil and dried fish. The floor was packed earth, hard, uneven, dusty in summer, muddy in winter. Some wealthier families had stone floors, but probably not yours. Furniture was minimal. Not because you preferred minimalism, but because furniture was expensive and took up space. You had sleeping mats woven reed or wool rolled up during the day and spread out at night. You had low tables, just wooden planks on short legs. You had some storage jars, large clay vessels for water, grain, oil, wine, maybe a few bowls and cups. A lamp or 2 small clay oil lamps that gave off a flickering, smoky light. That was about it. No chairs, no couches. You sat on the floor or on your rolled-up sleeping mats. You ate sitting, cross-legged on the ground, and you shared this space with everyone. Your wife, your children, maybe your parents if they were still alive, maybe a widowed sister or an unmarried brother. 3 generations under one small roof was completely normal. Privacy didn't exist, not really. You couldn't go to your room and close the door. There weren't separate bedrooms. Everyone slept in the same space, or maybe the parents had one small room and the children slept in another. You heard everything, every conversation, every argument, every illness, every snore. You were never alone. At night you spread out the sleeping mats. Everyone claimed their spot. The mats were thin, not much padding between you and the hard ground. If you were wealthy, maybe you had a stuffed cushion or a wool blanket. But most people just had a cloak to pull over themselves when it got cold. You slept in your tunic. You didn't have pajamas. You just laid down in whatever you'd been wearing all day, pulled your cloak over you, and tried to sleep despite the discomfort and the noise and the fleas. Yes, fleas. And probably lice too. Infestations were common. You couldn't really get rid of them. You just lived with them, scratching, constantly scratching. Sleep came quickly, though, because you were exhausted. You'd been up since before dawn. You'd worked all night. Your body demanded rest. So despite the hard floor and the itching and the snoring family members around you, you fell asleep within minutes. And then, a few hours later, you woke up and did it all again. Food. Let's talk about food. Because your diet was repetitive, limited, mostly the same things over and over. Bread was the foundation of every meal. Barley bread, usually not wheat. Wheat was more expensive. Barley was the grain of the poor and working class. Your wife or daughters ground the grain by hand every day, kneeling over a stone grinder, pushing the upper stone in circles over the lower stone, crushing the kernels into flour. It took hours. Their shoulders and backs ached from it constantly. Then they mixed the flour with water and a bit of salt, kneaded it, shaped it into flat rounds, baked it on a hot stone or in a small clay oven. The bread was flat, dense, chewy, not particularly delicious, but filling. You ate bread at every meal, morning, midday, evening. Always bread. With the bread you might have olive oil to dip it in. Olives were plentiful in Galilee. Every family had access to olive oil. It was your primary source of fat. You used it for cooking, for lamps, for medicine, for everything. You might have some vegetables. Lentils were common boiled into a thick stew. Beans, onions, garlic, leeks, cucumbers, whatever was in season and affordable. You might have some fruit. Figs, dates, pomegranates, grapes. Again, whatever was in season. These were treats. You didn't eat them every day, and you had fish, obviously. More fish than most people because you caught your own grilled fish, salted fish, dried fish, fish stew, fish with bread, fish with lentils. Fish, fish, fish. What you didn't have much of was meat. Beef, lamb, goat, those were expensive. You only ate meat on special occasions. Sabbath meals if you were doing well. Religious festivals. Weddings. That was about it. Most of your meals were bread, oil, vegetables, and fish. The same things, every day, with minor variations depending on the season. You didn't eat to enjoy food. You ate to survive, to have energy for the work. Meals were functional, not pleasurable, and the portions were small. You didn't have excess. You ate enough to keep going, but you were probably hungry a lot. That constant low-level hunger that never quite went away. Your stomach never felt completely full. This is what Jesus meant when he taught his disciples to pray, "Give us this day our daily bread." It wasn't metaphorical. It was literal. You needed bread today. You needed it tomorrow. You needed it every day, and you weren't sure you'd always have it. Water. You got water from the lake, from wells, from cisterns that collected rainwater. It wasn't always clean. You boiled it sometimes, if you were concerned. But mostly you just drank it and hoped you didn't get sick. Sickness happened, though. Stomach illnesses from contaminated water. Skin infections from the constant moisture and lack of hygiene. Respiratory problems from the smoky indoor air. Those oil lamps and cooking fires filled the house with smoke, and there wasn't much ventilation. Eye infections were common. The glare from the sun reflecting off the water, the dust in the air, the lack of proper washing, all of this led to chronic eye problems. Many people went partially blind as they aged. Dental problems. No toothbrushes, no dentists. Your teeth wore down from the gritty bread stone grinders, left tiny particles of stone in the flour. Cavities developed. Teeth fell out. By the time you were 40, you were probably missing several teeth. Life expectancy was short. If you survived childhood, and many didn't, you might live to your 50s or 60s if you were lucky. But many men died younger. Accidents on the water, storms, disease, the hard labor wore your body down. Bathing was infrequent. There was the ritual washing at the mikveh for religious purity, but daily bathing wasn't really a thing. You didn't have running water. Heating water took time and fuel. So you washed your hands and face regularly, maybe your feet, but a full bath? That was rare, which meant you smelled. Everyone smelled. Body odor was just part of life. You didn't really notice it on yourself or your family because you were used to it. But add in the fish smell, the smoke smell, the sweat from physical labor, and, yeah, you were pretty ripe most of the time. Your clothes. You owned maybe 2 tunics, maybe 3 if you were wealthy. One for working, one for Sabbath. The tunics were simple, basically a large rectangular piece of wool or linen, folded and sewn up the sides, with holes for your head and arms. You wore a belt around your waist to keep it from dragging on the ground. Over the tunic you wore a cloak, a larger rectangular piece of fabric that could be wrapped around you in various ways. It was your coat in winter, your blanket when you slept, your prayer shawl in the synagogue. It was multi-purpose. You wore sandals, leather straps over a leather sole, simple, practical. They wore out regularly, and you repaired them or replaced them when you had to. And that was your entire wardrobe. 2 tunics, a cloak, sandals, maybe a head covering a cloth, to protect from sun and keep sweat out of your eyes. You washed your clothes occasionally, beating them against rocks in the lake, letting the sun dry them. But they were never really clean. They were stained, worn, patched. You wore them until they literally fell apart, and then you patched them again. This was life. This was normal. Everyone lived this way. Everyone except the very wealthy, and there weren't many of those in fishing villages. You accepted it. You didn't know any different. This was just how people lived, how your parents lived, how their parents lived, how your children would live. Simple, hard, repetitive, exhausting, but also in some ways stable, predictable. You knew what each day would bring. You knew your role, your place, your community. There was a rhythm to it, a pattern. Wake, work, eat, sleep, repeat. Sabbath every 7 days, a day of rest, of worship, of family. Festivals throughout the year marking the seasons and the harvest and the holy days. Your life was narrow, but it was full. Full of family, full of work, full of community. You weren't alone in your struggles. Everyone around you was struggling in the same ways, and in that shared struggle there was connection. There was meaning. There was the satisfaction of providing for your family, of pulling your weight, of being part of something larger than yourself. It wasn't a good life by modern standards, but it was your life, and you lived it the best you could, until someone came along and offered something different, something more, something beyond the endless cycle of work and exhaustion and just barely getting by. And when that offer came, well, we'll get to that. But first, let's look at the moment when everything changed for those first fishermen. Let's see what happened when Jesus called. Picture this moment. You're Peter, or maybe you're Andrew, or James or John. It doesn't matter which one. What matters is that you're a fisherman. You've been a fisherman your whole life. You'll be a fisherman until you die. It's a morning like 1,000 other mornings. You're on the shore. Maybe you're washing your nets after a long night of fishing. Maybe you're mending them, your hands working automatically through the familiar motions, tying knots, threading cord through torn sections. You're tired. Of course you're tired. You're always tired. Maybe last night was a good night. Maybe you caught enough to keep the tax collectors satisfied and feed your family. Or maybe it was a bad night. Maybe you worked from darkness to dawn and caught nothing, and now you're facing another day of worry about how to make ends meet. Either way, you're doing what you always do, maintaining the equipment, preparing for the next trip. The cycle continues forever, and then someone approaches, a teacher, a rabbi. You've heard about him. Everyone's heard about him. He's been teaching in the synagogues, healing people, drawing crowds. His name is Jesus from Nazareth. He stops near your boat, and he looks at you, really looks at you. Not the dismissive glance of a Pharisee who smells the fish on you and judges you as ha-retz. Not the calculating look of a tax collector assessing how much he can squeeze out of you, but a look that sees you, the actual person underneath the exhaustion and the smell and the calloused hands. And he says something completely unexpected. Follow me, just that. 2 words. Follow me. And then he adds, I will make you fishers of men. And in that moment, everything stops. Time seems to pause, because you understand what he's asking. He's asking you to leave, to walk away, to abandon the boat, the nets, the business, the family trade, to give up your identity, your livelihood, your entire life as you know it. He's asking you to follow him into what you don't really know. He's a traveling teacher. He has no home, no settled place. Following him means wandering, uncertainty, no regular income, no predictable future. It's insane. It's reckless. It's irresponsible. You have obligations, family depending on you, debts to pay, a business to run. You can't just leave. But then again, what exactly are you leaving? A life of endless labor that barely keeps you fed? Crushing economic pressure that never lets up? Social stigma that marks you as less than? A future that holds nothing but more of the same until your body gives out? When you really think about it, what are you leaving? Yes, there's the family business. Your father built this. His father before him. Generations of work. Walking away is a betrayal of that legacy. But it's also liberation from it. You never chose this life. It was chosen for you. You've been trapped in it since birth. And now someone is offering you a door, a way out. Yes, there's the obligation to your family. Your father, if he's still alive, needs your labor. Your brothers need your partnership. Your wife needs your income. But they'll manage. They always have. Other men will fill the gap. The work will continue. The family business won't collapse without you. It'll be hard for a while, yes, but it'll survive. And more importantly, maybe there's something more important than just perpetuating the cycle. Maybe there's something worth risking everything for. You look at this teacher, this rabbi who chose to approach fishermen instead of scholars, who sees value in people like you, who's offering something different, something new, something that feels like hope. And in that moment you make a choice, a crazy, impulsive, terrifying choice. You drop the nets, literally. You let them fall from your hands into the water or onto the sand. You stand up. You step away from the boat, and you follow him, just like that. No lengthy deliberation, no careful planning, no gradual transition. You just go. The Gospel of Mark describes it starkly. At once they left their nets and followed him. At once, immediately, without hesitation. Why? Why would experienced, practical men make such a rash decision? Maybe because when you've been desperate long enough, when you've been trapped long enough, when you've been told you're lesser long enough, when someone finally offers you something more, you grab it, even if it's risky, even if it doesn't make sense, even if everyone thinks you're crazy. You grab it because it's the first real choice you've had in your entire life, and you're not going to let it slip away. Or maybe it wasn't even that calculated. Maybe in that moment, looking at Jesus, you just knew. Something deep inside you recognized that this man was different, that he was offering something real, that following him was the right thing to do even if you couldn't explain why. The Gospel of John adds an interesting detail. Some of the disciples, including Peter and Andrew, had already met Jesus. They'd been followers of John the Baptist, and John had pointed to Jesus and said, "Behold, the Lamb of God." They'd spent time with Jesus, talked with him, been intrigued by him. So maybe this wasn't quite as sudden as it seems. Maybe there was a build-up. Maybe they'd been considering it. Maybe when Jesus finally said, "Follow me," it was a culmination of something that had been growing for a while. But even so, even if they'd been thinking about it, the actual act of walking away, that took courage, that took faith, that took a willingness to risk everything on a person they'd known for only a short time. And they did it. Peter and Andrew dropped their nets. James and John left their father Zebedee in the boat with the hired servants and followed Jesus. Think about that scene. Zebedee watching his sons walk away. He'd trained them, worked beside them, built a business with them, and now they're leaving, just leaving. The Gospel doesn't tell us what Zebedee said or felt, but it must have been painful, confusing, maybe angry, or maybe he saw something too. Maybe he understood on some level that this was important, that his sons were being called to something bigger. But whatever he felt, they left, and their lives were never the same. They didn't know what they were getting into. They didn't know they'd see Jesus walk on water, calm storms, feed thousands with a few loaves and fish. They didn't know they'd watch him die on a cross or see him resurrected. They didn't know they'd become leaders of a movement that would spread across the world. All they knew was that a rabbi had said, "Follow me," and something in them said yes. They traded one form of fishing for another. Instead of catching fish in nets, they'd be catching people with the gospel. Instead of hauling in the catch from the Sea of Galilee, they'd be hauling in believers from every nation. The skills they'd learned as fishermen: patience, persistence, teamwork, willingness to work through the night, ability to handle disappointment and keep trying, all of that transferred. Jesus knew what he was doing when he chose fishermen. They were used to hard work with uncertain outcomes. They were used to following someone's lead in the boat. They were used to casting nets and trusting that something would happen even if they couldn't see it yet. They were perfect for what was coming, even if they didn't know it yet. And here's the beautiful part. Jesus didn't choose them because they were perfect. He didn't choose them because they were educated or respectable or ritually pure. He chose them despite, or maybe because of, their rough edges, their lack of credentials, their low social status. He chose the ones nobody else wanted, the ones everybody overlooked, the ones who smelled like fish, and he made them apostles, foundation stones of the church, men whose names would be remembered for thousands of years. Not bad for a bunch of fishermen from Galilee. Not bad at all. So when you read those stories in the Gospels about Jesus calling the disciples, remember what you know now. Remember the life they were living. The exhaustion, the economic pressure, the social stigma, the endless grinding cycle of work that never got easier. Remember what they were leaving behind, and remember what they were walking toward. They were leaving behind slavery to the system and walking toward freedom in the kingdom of God. They were leaving behind stigma and second-class status and walking toward being chosen, valued, loved. They were leaving behind hopelessness and walking toward hope. No wonder they dropped their nets. No wonder they followed immediately. When someone offers you a way out of the trap you've been in your whole life, you don't hesitate. You don't delay. You don't make excuses. You drop everything and you go. That's what they did. And that's why their story still matters. Because some of us are still in traps, still in cycles we can't seem to break, still hearing voices that tell us we're less than, that we smell bad, that we'll never be anything more than what we are. And Jesus still shows up on the shore, still looks at us with eyes that see who we really are, still says, "Follow me," and the choice is still ours. Drop the nets, or keep hauling them forever. The fishermen chose to drop them, and everything changed. We talked about storms earlier, how dangerous they were, how they appeared suddenly, how they killed people. But let's go back to that specific night. The night recorded in Mark chapter 4, Matthew chapter 8, and Luke chapter 8. The night when Jesus slept through a storm that terrified experienced fishermen. It was evening. Jesus had been teaching all day by the lake. Huge crowds had gathered. So many people that he'd gotten into a boat and pushed off from shore a bit so he could teach from the boat while the crowd stood on the beach. That way everyone could see and hear him. He taught in parables. Stories about seeds and soil, about lamps and baskets, about mustard seeds and yeast. The crowds listened, fascinated. But teaching is exhausting. Pouring out wisdom and truth for hours, Jesus was drained. When evening came, he said to his disciples, "Let's go over to the other side of the lake, from the Jewish side to the Gentile side, from Capernaum to the region of the Gerasenes." So they got into the boat. Several boats, actually the text mentions other boats with them, and they pushed off from shore and started rowing across. It was maybe 5 or 6 miles to the other side, an hour or 2 of rowing depending on wind and currents. Routine for these fishermen. They'd made this crossing countless times. Jesus went to the stern of the boat, the back. There was a cushion there, maybe a leather cushion used for sitting, or maybe just some folded sails. He lay down, put his head on the cushion, and fell asleep. Deep sleep, the sleep of complete exhaustion. He'd been pouring himself out for people all day, teaching, healing, constantly surrounded, constantly giving. He needed rest. And when the opportunity came, his body took it. The disciples rowed. The water was calm. The evening was peaceful. Everything seemed fine. And then the wind picked up, suddenly, from nowhere. One of those Galilean storms we talked about. Cold air rushing down from the Golan Heights, colliding with the warm air over the lake. Within minutes, the water went from calm to chaos. Waves started forming, small at first, then larger still. The wind howled. The boat rocked. Water began splashing over the sides. The disciples went into action mode. These were experienced men. They knew what to do in a storm. Lower the sail if it was up. Turn the boat to face the waves head on. Start bailing water. Hold tight. But this storm kept getting worse. The waves grew taller. 10 feet, maybe more. The boat was pitching wildly. Bow rising up, up as a wave hit, then crashing down into the trough behind it. Then the stern rising, the bow submerging. Water was coming in. A lot of water. faster than they could bail it out. The boat was getting heavier, sitting lower, more vulnerable to the next wave, and now they were genuinely afraid, not nervous, not concerned, afraid, terror, afraid. We're going to die afraid. These were men who'd been on this lake their entire lives. They'd seen storms before. They'd survived storms before. If they were this scared, the situation was truly dire. And through all of this, through the howling wind and the crashing waves, and the disciples, shouting and scrambling, and bailing, Jesus was asleep, still asleep, in the stern, on the cushion, somehow impossibly sleeping through a storm that was about to kill them all. Finally, they couldn't take it anymore. They went to him, shook him awake, and they had to shout to be heard over the wind. "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" Think about that question. Don't you care? Not, can you help? Not, what should we do? But don't you care? It's accusatory. It's desperate. It's the cry of people who think they're about to die, and they can't understand why the person they've been following, the person who's supposed to be the Messiah, is sleeping through their crisis. Don't you care that we're drowning? Jesus woke up. Maybe groggy at first, maybe immediately alert. The gospel doesn't say, but he woke up, and he assessed the situation. Wind howling, waves crashing, boat filling with water, disciples terrified. And he stood up. In the rocking boat, in the storm, he stood up, and he spoke, not to the disciples, to the storm. He rebuked the wind, the actual wind, like it was a person, like it was a demon, like it was something that could hear and understand and obey. "Quiet," he said, "be still." And it happened, immediately, instantly. The wind stopped, just stopped, from howling to nothing in a second. The waves didn't gradually calm down. They didn't slowly diminish. They flattened. The sea became completely calm, like glass, like it had never been disturbed. The boat stopped rocking. The water inside sloshed gently and then settled. Everything was still, silent, calm. The disciples stood there, dripping wet, exhausted from bailing, adrenaline still coursing through them. And they looked at Jesus, and they looked at the suddenly calm water. And they didn't know what to make of it. Jesus turned to them, and he asked a question. "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith? Why are you so afraid?" As if their fear was unreasonable, as if they should have known they'd be fine because he was with them. Do you still have no faith? After everything they'd seen, after all the miracles, after all the teaching, they still didn't fully trust that he was in control. And the disciples, they didn't answer him. They were too overwhelmed, too shocked. They just looked at each other and whispered, "Who is this?" Even the wind and the waves obey him. That's the question, isn't it? Who is this? Because what they just witnessed wasn't normal. It wasn't natural. Wind doesn't stop on command. Waves don't flatten instantly. Nature doesn't obey human voices. Unless the voice isn't merely human, unless the person speaking is the one who created nature in the first place, the one who spoke and separated water from dry land, the one who set boundaries for the seas and said, "This far you may come, and no farther." The disciples had been following Jesus for a while now. They'd seen him heal the sick. They'd seen him cast out demons. They'd heard him teach with authority that amazed everyone. But this was different. This was power over creation itself. This was the kind of power that only God has. And it terrified them. Mark says they were terrified. Matthew says they were amazed. Luke says they were afraid and amazed. The Greek word suggests awe mixed with fear. The kind of fear you feel when you encounter something so far beyond your understanding that you don't know whether to fall on your face or run away. They had been afraid of the storm. Now they were afraid of Jesus. More afraid, actually, because you can understand a storm. It's dangerous, yes. Deadly, yes. But it's natural. It's weather. It follows patterns, even if those patterns are unpredictable. But a man who commands storms, that's not natural. That's supernatural. That's divine. That changes everything you thought you knew about who this person is. Remember, these were fishermen. They knew the Sea of Galilee better than anyone. They knew its moods, its dangers, its storms. They'd spent their entire lives learning to read the weather, to survive the storms, to respect the power of wind and water. And in one moment, with 3 words, quiet, be still, Jesus demonstrated that he had authority over the thing they'd feared most their entire lives. The sea that had killed their neighbors, their relatives, their friends. The sea that threatened them every time they went out. The sea that was capricious and dangerous and deadly. That sea obeyed Jesus. What do you do with that? How do you process it? You stand there, wet and exhausted and confused, and you whisper, "Who is this?" And maybe you start to realize that you've been following someone far more significant than you understood. Not just a teacher, not just a prophet, not just a miracle worker, but someone who has power over creation itself. Someone who can sleep peacefully in a storm because he absolutely knows that the storm can't harm him or anyone with him unless he permits it. Someone who doesn't panic in crisis because he's sovereign over the crisis. Someone who rebukes his disciples for their fear, not because the danger wasn't real, but because they should have understood by now that with him in the boat they were safe. Even if it didn't feel like it. Even if every rational calculation said they were about to die. This is a hard lesson, maybe the hardest lesson. To trust when everything visible says you should panic. To have faith when the waves are crashing over the sides and water is filling the boat and death seems certain. The disciples failed this test. They'd panicked. They were terrified. They accused Jesus of not caring. They woke him up not in faith, but in fear and desperation. And yet, he saved them anyway. He didn't say, "Well, you didn't have enough faith, so I guess you'll drown." He saved them. He calmed the storm. He brought them safely to the other side, because that's who he is. Not just powerful, but merciful. Not just in control, but compassionate. He did rebuke them gently. "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" He wanted them to learn, to grow, to understand that faith means trusting even in the storm. But he saved them first, asked questions later. And maybe that's the real miracle of this story. Not just that Jesus has power over storms, but that he uses that power to save frightened, faithless, panicking disciples who don't fully understand who he is yet. He meets them in their terror. He responds to their desperate plea. He calms the chaos that's overwhelming them. And then only then he teaches them about faith. The storm Jesus slept through became the storm that taught them who he really was, the Creator, the Sovereign, the one with authority over wind and waves and all of creation. They got into the boat with a rabbi. They arrived on the other shore, having traveled with God, and nothing would ever be the same again. The Sea of Galilee continued to have storms after that night. The wind still rushed down from the mountains. The waves still grew tall and dangerous. Fishermen still drowned. But these particular fishermen, the ones in the boat with Jesus that night, they knew something now that changed everything. They knew that the power of the storm was real, but the power of Jesus was greater. They knew that fear was a natural response to danger, but faith was a better response, a harder response, but better. They knew that even when Jesus seemed to be sleeping, even when it seemed like he didn't care, even when death felt certain, he was still in control, still sovereign, still able to speak and make chaos become calm. This was the lesson. This was the revelation. This was the moment when "who is this man we're following?" became a question with universe-altering implications. Who is this? He's the one who makes storms stop. He's the one who sleeps peacefully while chaos rages because chaos has no power over him. He's the one who rebukes wind like it's a misbehaving child, and it obeys immediately. He's the Lord, the Sovereign, the Creator, God himself walking among them in human flesh, and they were in the boat with him, wet, exhausted, terrified, but safe, because he was there. That's the story. That's what happened on the Sea of Galilee that night when experienced fishermen thought they were going to die, and Jesus woke up and proved them wrong with 3 words. Quiet, be still, and everything was. Let's talk about one more story, a strange one. A quiet miracle that doesn't get as much attention as the big ones, but it's fascinating, and it shows how intimately Jesus understood the lives of the fishermen he called to follow him. The setting is Capernaum, Peter's hometown. Jesus had made Capernaum his base of operations during his ministry in Galilee. He stayed in Peter's house often. Everyone in town knew who he was. And it was tax time. Specifically, it was time to pay the temple tax. Every Jewish male over the age of 20 was required to pay a half shekel per year to support the temple in Jerusalem. This was a religious obligation, a sacred duty. The money went to maintaining the temple, paying the priests, funding the sacrifices, keeping the whole system running. The tax collectors came to Peter, not Roman tax collectors this time, not the hated publicans who squeezed fishermen for everything they could get. These were temple tax collectors. They were collecting money for God's house. This was legitimate, respectable. They asked Peter, "Doesn't your teacher pay the temple tax?" It's a loaded question. Everyone was expected to pay. To refuse would be seen as rejecting the temple, rejecting the priesthood, maybe even rejecting God himself. It would cause offense, create scandal, give Jesus' enemies ammunition to use against him. Peter answered immediately, "Yes, he does. Of course he does. Jesus honors the temple. He's not a rebel against the religious system. He pays his taxes like everyone else." But then Peter went into the house, and before he could even bring up the subject, Jesus spoke first. This is important. Jesus knew about the conversation before Peter told him. He knew what had been asked. He knew what Peter had answered. He knew what was on Peter's mind. Jesus asked Peter a question, a teaching question. "What do you think, Simon? From whom do the kings of the earth collect duty and taxes, from their own children or from others?" Peter answered, "From others, obviously. Kings don't tax their own children. Kings tax their subjects. Their children are exempt. They're part of the royal family. The whole kingdom exists for them. They don't pay into it. Jesus said, then the children are exempt. Think about what he was saying. The temple tax was paid to support God's house. But Jesus was God's son. The temple was his Father's house. So technically he shouldn't have to pay. He was exempt. Kings don't tax their own children. It was a profound theological point. Jesus was asserting his identity as the Son of God, claiming exemption based on his unique relationship with the Father. If the temple was God's house and Jesus was God's son, then the temple was essentially his house. Why would he pay taxes to maintain his own Father's house? But then Jesus said something else. But so that we may not cause offense, go to the lake and throw out your line. Notice, so that we may not cause offense. Jesus was free to refuse payment. He had the right to claim exemption. But he chose not to exercise that right, because refusing would cause offense. It would create stumbling blocks. It would distract from his message, so he would pay, not because he had to, but because it was the loving thing to do, the peaceable thing, the thing that would avoid unnecessary conflict. But here's where it gets interesting. Jesus didn't have money. He lived as a wandering teacher. He depended on the generosity of others for his needs. He and his disciples had a common purse that Judas kept, but apparently there wasn't enough in it to pay the temple tax for both Jesus and Peter. So Jesus told Peter what to do. Go to the lake and throw out your line. Take the first fish you catch. Open its mouth and you will find a 4-drachma coin. Take it and give it to them for my tax and yours. A 4-drachma coin, also called a stater, worth exactly twice the temple tax, which meant it would cover the payment for both Jesus and Peter. Perfect provision. Exactly what was needed. But think about what Jesus was asking Peter to do. Go fishing, not with nets, with a line, a hook and line. One fish at a time fishing, and specifically catch the first fish. Don't keep casting until you get a big one, the first one. Whatever you catch first. And then this is the bizarre part: open its mouth. Look inside, and you'll find a coin. Peter had gutted thousands of fish in his life. Thousands. He'd seen what was inside fish. He'd found all sorts of things in their stomachs. Smaller fish they'd eaten, vegetation, pebbles, occasionally debris that had fallen in the water. What, a coin? A specific coin, a 4-drachma coin, which was relatively valuable. That would be in the mouth of the first fish he caught. It was absurd. It was impossible. It was exactly the kind of thing Jesus would do. The gospel doesn't tell us what happened next. Matthew just records the instruction and then moves on. But presumably Peter went. He took a line and a hook. He walked down to the lake where he'd spent his entire life, the water he knew better than anyone. He cast the line. Maybe he felt a little foolish. Maybe he was skeptical. Maybe he was curious. Maybe he just trusted that Jesus knew what he was talking about. He felt a tug. A fish took the bait. He pulled it in, the first fish. Maybe a mushed, a tilapia-type fish. Maybe something else. The gospel doesn't say. He held the fish, and he did what Jesus told him to do. He opened its mouth, maybe expecting nothing, maybe hoping for something, maybe not sure what to expect. And there it was, a coin, shining, metallic, valuable, exactly where Jesus said it would be. A 4-drachma coin in the mouth of a fish. Peter must have stared at it. turned it over in his fingers, made sure it was real, because this was impossible. Coins don't just appear in fish mouths. Fish don't swallow coins. And even if one had somehow, what were the odds that it would be exactly the right coin, in exactly the right fish, caught at exactly the right time? This wasn't luck. This wasn't coincidence. This was miracle, quiet miracle, personal miracle. No crowds, no fanfare, just Jesus providing exactly what was needed through a method that only a fisherman would appreciate. Because Jesus could have provided the money in 100 different ways. Someone could have donated it. It could have appeared in the common purse. An angel could have handed it to them. But Jesus chose this way. He sent Peter back to the lake, back to fishing, back to the work he knew. And he showed Peter and us that he's the Lord over all of creation, even the fish, even the coins, even the timing of everything. The fish swam in the lake Jesus had created. The coin was minted from metal that came from the earth Jesus had formed. And somehow, some way, Jesus arranged for that specific fish to have that specific coin in its mouth at the exact moment when Peter would catch it. The Creator providing for his followers through his creation. That's what this was. And there's something beautiful about the fact that this miracle is so specific. One coin, exactly the right denomination. Not too much, not too little. Just what was needed to pay the tax for two people without causing offense. Jesus didn't provide abundance this time. Number 153 fish. No thousands fed from a few loaves. Just one coin, sufficient, exact, perfect. It's a reminder that God's provision isn't always overwhelming abundance. Sometimes it's just enough. Just what you need, just when you need it. No more, no less. Peter took the coin. He went and paid the temple tax for both of them. And the issue was settled. No offense caused. No scandal created. Just simple obedience and simple provision, and the work of God happening quietly in the background. But Peter would remember this. How could he forget? Every time he caught a fish after that, every time he opened one's mouth to gut it, he'd remember the time there was a coin inside, the time Jesus provided in the most unexpected way. And maybe that was part of the lesson, that Jesus knows fishermen. He knows their work. He knows their world. He's not some distant deity who doesn't understand practical needs like paying taxes. He's present. He's involved. He cares about the details. The same Jesus who could command storms could also arrange for coins in fish mouths. The same Jesus who fed thousands could also provide for just two people's temple tax. The same Jesus who performed dramatic public miracles also performed quiet, private ones that nobody else would ever see. And he did it in a way that honored Peter's skill. Peter caught the fish. Peter opened its mouth. Peter took the coin. Peter paid the tax. Jesus provided the miracle, but Peter participated in it. He had to act in faith. He had to go fishing on Jesus' word. He had to trust that something impossible would happen, and it did. That's the story of the fish that paid taxes. A small story, a weird story, an easily overlooked story, but it's a story that shows how intimately Jesus understood the lives of fishermen, how he met them in their world, how he provided for practical needs through means that made sense to them, how he continued to show them, again and again, that he was Lord over everything, even fish, even coins, even taxes. He's the God of big miracles and small miracles, public signs and private provisions, dramatic rescues and quiet solutions. He's the God who sees, who knows, who cares, who provides, even when what you need is as specific and strange as a 4-drachma coin in a fish's mouth. Peter found it, just like Jesus said he would. And that was enough. We've traveled a long way tonight, haven't we? Back 2,000 years, across miles of water and waves and history and struggle. We've walked in the sandals of fishermen, felt the weight of waterlogged nets, smelled the fish and the salt and the sweat, understood the crushing economics, the endless labor, the social stigma, the constant exhaustion. We've seen why it sucked, really truly sucked, to be a fisherman on the Sea of Galilee. But we've also seen why it mattered that Jesus went there, to the docks, to the boats, to the men who smelled like fish and had rough hands and were looked down on by the religious elite. He went there because that's where people needed him. That's where people were trapped. That's where people were desperate for something more, something better, something beyond the endless cycle of barely surviving. He went there and he said, "Follow me." And they did. Because when you're drowning, literally or metaphorically, and someone offers you a hand, you take it. The storms were real. The danger was real. The struggle was real. But Jesus was more real than all of it. He calmed storms. He filled nets. He provided coins in fish mouths. He cooked breakfast on the beach. He restored broken men. He chose the overlooked, the undervalued, the ones nobody else wanted, and he made them foundation stones of his kingdom. He made their story part of the eternal story. He made their names Peter, Andrew, James, John names that would echo through centuries. Fishermen from Galilee became apostles. Net menders became church builders. Men who hauled fish became fishers of men. All because someone saw value in them that they didn't see in themselves. All because someone offered them something better. All because someone said, "Follow me," and meant it. The next time you read those gospel stories, the calling of the disciples, the calming of the storm, the miraculous catches, the breakfast on the beach, you'll see them differently now. You'll understand what was really happening, what was really at stake, what they were really leaving behind and walking toward. You'll see the humanity, the struggle, the fear and faith and failure and restoration. You'll see men like us, tired people doing hard work in a harsh world, people who needed rescue, people who needed hope, people who needed someone to say, "I see you, I choose you. Follow me," and maybe you'll hear that call for yourself. Maybe you're in your own kind of trap, your own endless cycle, your own version of hauling nets all night and catching nothing. Maybe you need someone to show up on your shore and say, "Try again, cast your net one more time. I'll show you where the fish are." Maybe you need someone to calm your storm, to speak peace into your chaos, to say, "Quiet, be still," and actually make it happen. Maybe you need someone to cook you breakfast after your failure, to restore you after your denial, to say, "I still see you, I still choose you, I still have work for you to do." Jesus did that for fishermen 2,000 years ago, and he still does it, for whoever needs it, for whoever will listen, for whoever will drop their nets and follow. The invitation stands, it's always stood, through all of history, across all cultures, to all people. Follow me. It's simple, it's profound, it's terrifying and beautiful and life-changing. The fisherman heard it and said yes. and their lives were never the same. May you rest well tonight. May you sleep peacefully. May you dream of calm waters and filled nets and warm fires on the beach. May you know that whatever you're facing, whatever storm is raging, whatever work seems impossible, you're not alone. You're seen, you're valued, you're called. And the one who calls you is the one who makes storms stop with a word, who provides coins in fish mouths, who cooks breakfast for his friends, who restores the broken and chooses the overlooked. He's still there, on the shore, in your storm, in your struggle, calling, always calling. Follow me. Let that be the last thought as you drift into sleep, that invitation, that possibility, that hope. Just let go now. Let yourself rest. Let the waves of this story carry you into peaceful sleep. There's nothing more you need to do tonight. Nothing more you need to figure out. Nothing more you need to prove. Just rest, be still, like the sea when Jesus spoke to it, like the disciples after breakfast on the beach, like the fishermen who finally dropped their nets and followed. Rest, and know that you are known, you are seen, you are called. Good night.